Admiral Patricia Hayes received Jake Morrison's emergency transmission 3 weeks later at the Terran Defense Command headquarters on Earth. She had been expecting routine reports about stellar cartography and mineral surveys, not news that humanity had stumbled into an ancient alien war that made human conflicts look like playground arguments. She played the message again, listening to Jake's calm voice describe ships larger than cities and aliens who had been fighting for 3,000 years over grievances that predated human civilization. The tactical data Lisa Bennett had gathered showed weapons signatures that could crack planets and defensive systems that could withstand the combined nuclear arsenal of Earth. Patricia had commanded human space forces for 15 years and had dealt with the usual problems of deep space exploration. Equipment failures, asteroid collisions, and the occasional pirate attack were manageable situations with established protocols. Ancient alien grudges were not covered in any manual she had ever read. The Galactic Council called an emergency session within days of receiving Earth's report. Patricia found herself sitting in the vast amphitheater on Nexus Station, surrounded by representatives of 47 different species, all expressing various degrees of concern about the news from human space. Ambassador Daniel Clark represented Earth in the council chambers. He was a career diplomat who had spent 10 years learning to navigate the complex politics of galactic civilization. His job was usually focused on trade agreements and cultural exchanges, not preventing wars between species that could destroy solar systems. The Altarian ambassador, a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms, spoke first. The resumption of the Veltar-Zephyrian conflict threatens the stability of this entire sector. Our merchant vessels use trade routes that pass through systems where they are likely to resume fighting. General Susan Ward sat beside Patricia in the Earth delegation section. She commanded the Terran Marine Corps and had been studying the tactical data from Jake's encounter. Her expression suggested she was not impressed by what the galaxy considered an unstoppable force. 3,000 years, Susan said quietly to Patricia. They've been mad at each other for 3,000 years over battles that happened before humans discovered agriculture. The Centaurian representative, whose species resembled large cats that walked upright, raised a concern that many others shared. Previous attempts to mediate between the Veltar and Zephyrians have failed completely. These species do not negotiate, they do not compromise, and they do not forgive. The last armistice took 500 years to arrange and only happened because both sides had exhausted their resources. Patricia listened to 20 more species express similar worries about ancient hatreds, unforgivable crimes, and the impossibility of reasoning with beings who measured grudges in millennia rather than years. Every alien representative seemed to accept that the Veltar and Zephyrians would fight until they destroyed each other or everything around them. When the Council asked for Earth's position on the crisis, Daniel Clark stood up and did something that shocked every being in the chamber. He smiled. "Honorable representatives," Daniel began, "I want to make sure I understand this situation correctly. 2 species have been angry at each other for 3,000 years because of things that happened before any currently living member of either species was born?" The Vegan ambassador, whose people looked like walking crystals, confirmed this assessment. The Veltar have perfect historical records preserved in their crystal matrices. They remember every detail of Zephyrian crimes as if they happened yesterday. And the Zephyrians pass down memories genetically through their bioneural networks, added the representative from Proxima. Their hatred is literally built into their DNA, Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I see. And in all this time, neither species has considered that maybe, just maybe, they're being a little bit ridiculous? The silence in the chamber was complete. Patricia had to admire Daniel's courage in calling the galaxy's most feared warrior races ridiculous in front of an assembly that was clearly terrified of them. The Altarian ambassador spoke carefully. "Ambassador Clark, I'm not sure you understand the scope of this conflict. The Veltar-Zephyrian War has destroyed entire civilizations. Billions of beings have died because these species cannot resolve their differences." Daniel's smile grew wider. "Oh, I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is why everyone is treating this like some kind of natural disaster instead of a problem that can be solved." General Ward stood up beside Daniel. "If I may address the Council, Earth has some experience with this type of situation. We call it holding a grudge, and we've found it's usually more trouble than it's worth." Patricia rose from her seat as well. "My species has fought wars over territory, resources, religion, politics, and sometimes just because we didn't like the way our neighbors looked. We've had conflicts that lasted centuries and produced generations of people who hated each other for reasons they couldn't even remember. The chamber filled with murmurs as alien representatives tried to process what the humans were saying. The idea that warfare could be ended through anything other than total victory or exhaustion seemed foreign to most of them. Daniel continued his speech with growing confidence. What we've learned is that most conflicts eventually become less about the original problem and more about the conflict itself. People start fighting to prove they were right to fight in the first place. Meanwhile, in the distant star system where Jake Morrison waited with his crew, something unprecedented was happening. Instead of fleeing from the impending battle, the humans were doing something that confused both alien fleets. Ryan Carter had been monitoring alien communications for days and noticed something interesting. The younger members of both crews seemed less enthusiastic about resuming ancient hostilities than their commanders expected. Many of the transmissions he intercepted included questions about why exactly they were preparing to fight. Lisa Bennett had an idea that she presented to Jake during the evening crew meeting. "Captain, what if we tried something completely different?" "I'm listening," Jake replied, though he suspected he might regret it. Both alien fleets have been preparing for battle for over a week now, but they keep talking instead of fighting. Maybe they're not as eager for war as they pretend to be. Mike Peterson, the chief engineer, had been thinking along similar lines. The energy readings suggest they're maintaining battle readiness but not actually charging weapons for immediate use. It's like they're going through the motions without committing to actual combat. Ryan had been working on a project that he had not yet mentioned to anyone. "Captain, I've been analyzing their communication patterns and I think I know why they're hesitating. Every time one commander issues an order to attack, the other side responds with a historical complaint, which leads to an argument about who violated what treaty when. They're stalling," Jake realized. Neither side wants to be the one who actually restarts the war. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And that gives us an opportunity to try something they won't expect. Such as, we start broadcasting to both fleets simultaneously. Not military communications or diplomatic messages, but something completely different." Jake was beginning to understand his science officer's plan, and it was either brilliant or completely insane. "What did you have in mind?" Ryan answered for her. "Human entertainment, sir. Comedy shows, specifically ones about conflict resolution and the absurdity of holding grudges." The idea was so unexpected that Jake found himself laughing, despite their dangerous situation. "You want to resolve an ancient alien war with situation comedies?" "It worked for my parents," Ryan said seriously. "They didn't speak to each other for 2 years after a fight about wedding planning, until my sister made them watch a TV show about a couple who broke up over something equally stupid. They were so embarrassed by seeing their own behavior reflected back at them that they made up the next day." Mike Peterson was already working out the technical details. "We can boost our communication array to reach both fleets simultaneously. If we broadcast on multiple frequencies, they won't be able to ignore us without shutting down their own communications entirely." Jake looked around at his crew and realized they were all waiting for his decision. In 30 years of military service, he had never faced a choice quite like this one. He could follow standard protocol and withdraw to a safe distance, leaving the aliens to destroy each other and probably several star systems in the process. Or he could try something so unprecedented that it might actually work. "Do it," he said. "If we're going to witness the resumption of a 3,000-year-old war, we might as well try to end it with reruns of classic television." Neliris had served aboard Veltar warships for 6 years and had never encountered anything like the strange transmissions coming from the small Terran vessel. As a junior tactical officer, her job was to monitor enemy communications and prepare targeting solutions for the coming battle against the Zephyrian biofleet. Instead, she found herself watching something called a situation comedy that featured humans arguing about trivial matters and somehow finding ways to resolve their differences through conversation and compromise. The concept was so foreign to Veltar culture that she had trouble understanding what she was seeing. Thuven experienced similar confusion aboard his Zephyrian biocruiser. The young communications specialist had been raised on stories of Veltar atrocities and had spent his adult life preparing for the day when the war would resume. The human broadcasts made no sense to his military training, but something about them kept him. watching during his off-duty periods. The shows the humans transmitted dealt with conflicts that seemed insignificant compared to the ancient grievances between his people and the Crystal Builders. Workplace disagreements, family arguments, and neighborhood disputes were resolved in 30-minute episodes with methods that would never work in real warfare. Captain Jake Morrison had not expected his plan to work so quickly. Within 3 days of beginning the broadcast, Ryan Carter reported that both alien fleets were receiving and apparently watching the human entertainment programs. More importantly, the energy signatures that indicated preparation for battle had decreased noticeably on ships from both sides. "They're actually paying attention," Lisa Bennett observed as she monitored alien communication channels. "I'm detecting increased chatter on internal frequencies, and the universal translator is picking up references to human concepts like compromise and forgiveness." Admiral Patricia Hayes had approved Jake's unconventional approach and authorized additional support from Earth. The converted passenger liner Comedy Central arrived in the system under the command of Captain Greg Johnson, loaded with professional entertainers and cultural specialists who had volunteered for the most unusual diplomatic mission in human history. Dr. Amanda Foster led the cultural team aboard Comedy Central. She held degrees in psychology, anthropology, and conflict resolution, but had never expected to use her education to prevent an alien war through the strategic application of humor. Her team included comedians, actors, therapists, and social workers who specialized in helping people overcome long-term grudges. The human strategy evolved from simply broadcasting recorded shows to performing live entertainment, specifically designed for their alien audience. Bobby Reynolds, a stand-up comedian from New York, developed material that gently mocked the concept of holding 3,000-year-old grudges. "So I'm reading about this conflict," Bobby said during his first live broadcast, "and apparently these two groups have been mad at each other since before humans invented the wheel. I mean, my wife still brings up things I said wrong 5 years ago, but 3,000 years, that's dedication to being angry." Sarah Mitchell, a comedienne from California, took a different approach by creating sketches that portrayed exaggerated versions of the Veltar and Zephyrian complaints. Her performances made both species' grievances sound ridiculous when presented as comedy routines. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we present Things My Neighbor Did Wrong 3 millennia ago. First up, the incident where they allegedly built their house 2 feet over the property line, which was clearly an act of war that can never be forgiven." The effect on both alien fleets was remarkable. Niliris found herself laughing at human jokes about ancient feuds, something that would have been considered treason if her commanders had known about it. More surprisingly, she began questioning why her people considered events from thousands of years ago more important than the present moment. Thuvin experienced similar doubts about Zephyrian priorities. The humans seemed to resolve their conflicts by talking about them, admitting mistakes and moving forward together. His people's approach of preserving every grievance and passing hatred to future generations suddenly seemed less noble than he had been taught. Dr. Amanda Foster recognized that the entertainment was having an effect, but decided to escalate the cultural intervention. She began broadcasting programs that were disguised as variety shows but were actually conflict resolution workshops featuring real examples of how humans had overcome historical disputes. "Today we're talking about the 100 Years' War between England and France," she announced during one session. "These two countries fought for over a century, but somehow they managed to become allies and even friends. Today, English and French people work together, marry each other, and share cultural traditions. If they can get over 100 years of warfare, surely anyone can learn to let go of ancient grudges." Jennifer Walsh, a cultural attaché with experience in international diplomacy, focused on presenting examples of human communities that had overcome seemingly impossible divisions. She told stories of families reunited after decades of silence, neighbors who became friends after years of feuding, and entire nations that had moved from warfare to cooperation. "The key," Jennifer explained during her broadcasts, "is remembering that the goal isn't to prove you were right about the past. It's to create a better future for everyone involved." Captain Jake Morrison observed that both alien fleets were losing their focus on military preparation. Weapon systems remained powered down, and many ships had repositioned themselves to better receive human broadcasts rather than to achieve tactical advantage. Veltar Commander Kessethan, and Zephyrian War Leader. Morgul both faced an unprecedented problem. Their crews were more interested in watching human entertainment than preparing for battle, and neither commander could explain why the strange Terran broadcasts were so compelling. The humans are interfering with military operations, Kessethan complained during a communication with his fleet commanders. Their primitive displays are disrupting crew discipline. Morgul expressed similar frustration to his bioship captains. These Terran comedy performances are undermining the righteous anger that drives our warriors. How can we fight with proper hatred when the enemy of our enemy makes us laugh at our own cause? The situation reached a crisis point when Tony Martinez, a comedian from Texas, performed a routine that went viral across both fleets. He created a mock competition called the Ancient Grudge, Olympics that featured events like longest time spent being angry about something and most creative excuse for not talking to your neighbors. In the gold medal position, we have the Veltar and Zephyrians with an impressive 3,000-year streak of being mad about the same things, Tony announced to his audience. That's longer than recorded human history, folks. These people have been angry since before we figured out agriculture. The routine was forwarded from ship to ship on both sides of the conflict. Narration and Thuvan both saved copies and began sharing them with friends from their respective fleets. For the first time in either of their lives, they were communicating with members of the opposing species for reasons that had nothing to do with warfare. The breakthrough came when several crew members from both fleets began asking the same question in their internal communications. If humans could resolve their conflicts through conversation and compromise, why couldn't Veltar and Zephyrians do the same thing? Dr. Amanda Foster detected this shift in alien attitudes and decided to implement the final phase of Operation Chuckle. She began broadcasting human children's shows that dealt with conflict resolution, featuring animated characters who learned to share, apologize, and work together to solve problems. Today, Big Bird and Elmo are going to show us how to say, "I'm sorry when we hurt someone's feelings," announced one program that was watched by thousands of alien military personnel who had never encountered the concept of apology as a tool for ending disputes. Captain Jake Morrison realized that something fundamental was changing when both alien commanders simultaneously requested direct communication with Earth's highest military authority. They were no longer preparing for battle against each other, but they were clearly frustrated by humanity's unprecedented approach to their ancient conflict. "I think we're about to find out if our plan worked," Jake told his crew, "or if we've just made both sides angry at us instead of each other." Lisa Bennett, who had been monitoring energy signatures throughout the system, provided an optimistic assessment. "Captain, neither fleet has charged weapons for combat in over a week. Whatever we've done, we've definitely changed their priorities." Ryan Carter, who had become something of an expert on alien psychology through his communication monitoring, offered his own observation. "Sir, I think we've accidentally taught them that their war might not be as important as they thought it was." The moment that changed everything happened during Tony Martinez's second live performance when he created what became known throughout both alien fleets as the Great Grudge Game Show. Tony had noticed that both species seemed to take pride in the complexity and duration of their historical complaints, so he decided to turn their conflict into entertainment. "Welcome to Who Can Stay Mad the Longest," Tony announced with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Today's contestants are the Veltar Crystal Empire and the Zephyrian Biorepublic, competing for the galaxy's record for most ridiculous reasons to avoid talking to your neighbors." He created fictional game show categories like things that happened before anyone alive was born, complaints about property lines in space, and most creative ways to avoid saying sorry. Each category featured exaggerated versions of actual Veltar and Zephyrian grievances, presented as competition events rather than serious diplomatic issues. "For 3,000 points, Tony continued, name something your species did that was definitely wrong but you're too proud to admit it." The audience aboard the Comedy Central laughed, but more importantly, both alien fleets were listening. Narration watched the performance during her off-duty shift and found herself thinking about questions she had never considered before. Her crystal matrix education had taught her that Veltar were always justified in their actions, and Zephyrians were always wrong. But the human comedian suggested that both sides had probably made mistakes over 3,000 years of conflict. Thuven had similar thoughts aboard his bioship. His genetic memories contained detailed records of Veltar crimes, but the human game show made him wonder if Zephyrians had also done things they should apologize for. The concept of mutual responsibility was not part of his cultural programming, but it made logical sense. Dr. Amanda Foster recognized that Tony's comedy routine was having a deeper effect than simple entertainment. She began developing more sophisticated programming that addressed the psychological foundations of long-term conflict while maintaining the humorous approach that had proven so effective. Today we're featuring generational grudges. When your great-great-grandchildren are still mad about something, she announced during her next cultural workshop. We'll examine how conflicts can become more about the fighting than about the original problem, and why sometimes the best way to honor your ancestors is to do something they never managed to accomplish. The human cultural offensive reached new levels when Dr. Amanda decided to broadcast children's educational programs alongside the adult comedy, shows designed to teach young humans about sharing. Apology and conflict resolution began resonating with alien crew members who realized their ancient and noble war resembled playground arguments between stubborn children. Today, Mr. Rogers is going to talk about what it means to be a good neighbor, announced one program that was secretly downloaded by thousands of military personnel from both fleets. Sometimes we get angry at our neighbors because we don't understand them. But when we take time to listen and try to see things from their perspective, we often discover that we have more in common than we thought. Captain Greg Johnson aboard the Comedy Central reported that alien communication traffic had increased dramatically. But instead of battle preparations, the transmissions consisted of crew members from opposing fleets discussing human entertainment and asking each other questions about their respective cultures. Jennifer Walsh, monitoring these cross-fleet communications, realized that something unprecedented was happening. Captain Morrison, she reported during a joint briefing, we have Veltar and Zephyrian personnel talking to each other for the first time in 3,000 years, and they're not exchanging threats or insults. Nell Iris had been one of the first to establish contact with Thuven after they both participated in an online discussion about a human comedy special. Their initial conversation was awkward because neither species had protocols for peaceful communication with their ancient enemies, but they discovered they shared similar doubts about the wisdom of resuming warfare. I have been thinking about the human comedian's question, Nell Iris transmitted in carefully formal language. Can you explain why our species consider events from millennia past more important than the present moment? Thuven's response revealed that he had been wondering the same thing. My genetic memories contain detailed records of Veltar aggression, but I have no personal experience of harm from your people. The humans suggest that hatred passed down through generations may not be wisdom, but rather a burden that prevents progress. Their conversation was monitored by intelligence officers from both fleets, who found themselves unable to classify the exchange as either military intelligence or security threat. Two enemy personnel were discussing philosophy and questioning their own cultural assumptions, which had no precedent in 3,000 years of conflict. Captain Jake Morrison received a priority transmission from Admiral Patricia Hayes, informing him that Earth was sending additional cultural support. The diplomatic vessel New Horizons was being prepared with a full team of marriage counselors, family therapists, and conflict resolution specialists. Marriage counselors? Jake asked during the secure communication. Dr. Kevin Thompson pointed out that the Veltar-Zephyrian conflict has all the characteristics of a dysfunctional relationship, Patricia explained. Two parties who define themselves entirely through their opposition to each other, who bring up past grievances instead of addressing current issues, and who seem to get more satisfaction from fighting than from actually resolving their problems. Meanwhile, both alien commanders were struggling with crew discipline issues they had never encountered before. Veltar Commander Keston discovered that his tactical officers were spending more time discussing human entertainment than analyzing enemy fleet movements. The crew shows disturbing interest in Terran cultural presentations that undermine military readiness, he reported to his fleet commanders. They ask questions about concepts like compromise and forgiveness that have no place in proper Veltar military thinking. War leader Morgul faced similar challenges aboard Zephyrian vessels. The bio-neural networks that should be processing battle strategies are instead analyzing human comedy routines. Some crew members have begun questioning the necessity of resuming hostilities with the Crystal Builders. The situation reached a tipping point when Lucy Chen, a comedian from San Francisco, performed a routine about her grandmother's 30-year feud with a neighbor over a fence line that had been built 6 inches too far onto the wrong property. They didn't speak for 3 decades, Lucy explained to her audience. 30 years of walking past each other without saying hello. 30 years of family gatherings where we had to make sure they weren't invited to the same events. 30 years of my grandmother telling everyone who would listen about the Great Fence Incident of 1987. The story resonated powerfully with alien audiences because it featured a conflict that had lasted long enough to affect multiple generations, just like their own war, but over something that seemed trivial in comparison to galactic warfare. The funny thing is, Lucy continued, when my grandmother was dying, she couldn't remember why the fence was such a big deal. She just knew she had been angry for so long that she didn't know how to stop being angry. The neighbor came to the funeral, and they would have been friends if they had just talked to each other instead of nurturing their grudge for 30 years. Naliris and Thuvan both saved recordings of Lucy's performance and shared it with their respective crew members. The story of 2 humans who wasted decades being angry over something neither of them could properly explain struck both species as uncomfortably familiar. The real breakthrough came when crew members from both fleets began organizing secret viewing parties to watch human entertainment together, using encrypted channels that their commanders couldn't monitor. Mixed groups of Veltar and Zephyrians began meeting virtually to discuss comedy shows, share opinions about conflict resolution, and ask each other questions about their respective cultures. Dr. Amanda Foster detected this unprecedented cooperation and decided to provide programming specifically designed for joint viewing. She began broadcasting cultural exchange hours that featured humans from different backgrounds explaining how their communities had overcome historical divisions. Tonight, we have representatives from Northern Ireland discussing how Catholics and Protestants learned to work together after centuries of conflict, she announced during one special program. Tomorrow we'll hear from South African leaders who dismantled apartheid through negotiation rather than warfare. And next week we'll feature Japanese and American veterans who became friends after World War II. Captain Morrison observed that both alien fleets had essentially stopped preparing for war. Ships remained in position, but weapons systems stayed powered down, and crew rotations focused more on entertainment, consumption than military readiness. Think we've accidentally created the galaxy's first peace movement, he told Lisa Bennett during their daily status briefing. These 2 species have spent so much time learning to hate each other that they never learned how to stop. Lisa had been analyzing communication patterns between the fleets and discovered something. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the Terran research vessel Starbound Horizon and watched the stars through the main view screen. The deep space mission had been routine for 3 months now, just mapping star systems and looking for new planets that might support human life. His crew of 42 had settled into a comfortable rhythm of daily work and evening recreation periods. Lisa Bennett, his chief science officer, worked at her station scanning the 5th planet in the system they had just entered. She was a quiet woman in her 30s who loved discovering new things about the universe. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she rarely looked up from her instruments except to share exciting discoveries with the crew. Ryan Carter handled communications from his position near the captain's chair. He was younger than most of the crew, barely 25, but he had a gift for languages and technology that made him invaluable on long missions like this one. His job was to monitor all frequencies and maintain contact with Earth, though messages took weeks to travel the vast distances between stars. The morning shift had just begun when Ryan's equipment started making sounds none of them had ever heard before. Strange signals filled every communication channel, overlapping and interfering with each other in patterns that suggested multiple sources broadcasting at once. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual," Ryan said, adjusting his controls to try to make sense of the signals. "Multiple transmissions on frequencies we don't normally use, and they're getting stronger." Jake leaned forward in his chair. In 3 years of commanding deep space missions, he had learned to pay attention when his crew noticed anything out of the ordinary. Space was vast and mostly empty, so when something unusual happened, it was usually important. Can you determine the source? He asked. Before Ryan could answer, Lisa looked up from her science station with wide eyes. Captain, you need to see this. I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching our position. Whatever is coming, it's big. The main view screen flickered and changed to show space around their ship. At first, everything looked normal, just stars and empty space. Then the universe seemed to tear itself apart. Huge ships appeared from nowhere, materializing out of what looked like holes in space itself. They came in two distinct groups, and even someone with no military training could see they were not friendly toward each other. The ships on the left were long and thin, made of what appeared to be crystal or glass that caught and reflected starlight in beautiful but intimidating patterns. The ships on the right looked organic, like they had been grown rather than built, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. How many ships are we looking at? Jake asked, though he suspected he did not want to know the answer. Lisa worked quickly at her station, her fingers dancing over the controls as she gathered data. I count over 200 vessels in total, roughly equal numbers from each group. Captain, some of these ships are larger than anything in our fleet. The biggest ones are over 3 kilometers long. The human ship Starbound Horizon was only 200 meters from end to end. Jake realized they were like a small boat that had wandered into the middle of a battle between two navies of aircraft carriers. Ryan's equipment suddenly filled with clear voices, speaking in languages none of them recognized. The universal translator that all human ships carried began working on the signals, and slowly the alien words became understandable. Veltar scum, you dare to show your crystalline faces in this system after what your kind did at Kepler's crown 3,000 years ago? Came one voice. Full of anger and hatred, another voice answered. Equally angry, but with a different quality that suggested it came from a very different kind of throat. Zephyrian filth, your bioships polluted 17 worlds before we stopped you at the Battle of Twin Suns. The armistice you signed means nothing. If you continue to expand into neutral territory, Jake looked at Ryan. Are they talking to us? Ryan shook his head. No, sir, they seem to be talking to each other. I don't think they've even noticed we're here. More transmissions filled the communications channels as the two fleets positioned themselves for battle. Jake heard references to battles, treaties, betrayals, and crimes that had apparently happened thousands of years before humans had even developed agriculture. The hatred in the voices was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Veltar Keston speaks for the Crystal Armada, announced one of the alien voices. Your expansion ends here, Zephyrians. The armistice signed after the siege of Antares clearly states that this sector belongs to neither of our species. War leader Morgul commands the Biofleet in the name of the Zephyrian Republic, came the reply. We have claimed no worlds, only established research stations. It is you who violate the treaty by bringing warships into neutral space. Lisa had been quietly working at her station throughout the exchange. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups on ships from both fleets. Whatever they're planning to do to each other, it's going to be devastating. Jake made a decision that would later be remembered as either brilliant or completely insane. Ryan, open a channel to both fleets. Sir, are you sure that's wise? Ryan asked. Probably not, but we're about to be caught in the middle of what sounds like a war that's been going on since before human civilization existed. I'd rather they know we're here than have them accidentally destroy us while they're fighting each other. Ryan worked his controls and nodded. Channel open, Captain. Jake stood up and faced the view screen even though he knew the aliens could not see him. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran vessel Starbound Horizon. We are a peaceful research ship, and we're not involved in your conflict. We request safe passage out of this system. The response was immediate and came from both fleets at once. The Veltar commander's voice carried surprise and dismissal. Terrans? We have no records of this species. Are you allied with the Zephyrian Republic? The Zephyrian war leader sounded equally puzzled. Unknown vessels will withdraw immediately. This matter does not concern primitive species who have barely learned to travel between stars. Jake felt his temper rise at being called primitive, but he kept his voice calm. We're not allied with anyone. We're just scientists exploring space. We'll leave as soon as you tell us which direction is safe. All directions will be unsafe once we resume the war your presence has interrupted. Kesathan replied. The Veltar have no interest in protecting ships of unknown species. Morgul's response was equally unhelpful. Zephyrian forces cannot guarantee the safety of unregistered vessels. Withdraw beyond the asteroid belt and do not interfere. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Lisa was recording everything, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. Ryan was monitoring dozens of channels, trying to understand the scope of what they had stumbled into. The other crew members at their stations waited for orders from their captain. "Well," Jake said to no one in particular, "this is definitely not in the manual." The diplomatic vessel New Horizons arrived in the disputed star system with Admiral Patricia Hayes aboard, accompanied by what she privately considered the strangest peace delegation in human history. Dr. Kevin Thompson led a team of marriage counselors, family therapists, and conflict resolution specialists who had volunteered to treat an ancient alien war as if it were a couples therapy session. Both alien commanders had simultaneously demanded to speak with Earth's highest military authority about humanity's interference in their sacred conflict. Veltar Commander Keston and Zephyrian war leader Morgul had agreed to a three-way conference, though neither would admit they were more frustrated with the humans than with each other. The meeting took place aboard Captain Morrison's research vessel, which had become the unofficial neutral ground for the most unusual diplomatic summit in galactic history. The main conference room was reconfigured to accommodate three very different species, with very different ideas about proper diplomatic protocol. Commander Kessethan arrived first, his crystalline form reflecting light in patterns that indicated barely controlled irritation. His voice carried the harmonic overtones that Veltar used to express formal displeasure. "Admiral Hayes, your species has interfered with military operations that do not concern primitive civilizations who have barely learned to travel between stars." War leader Morgul's biomechanical form pulsed with colors that suggested similar annoyance. "The Zephyrian Republic demands an explanation for Terran disruption of lawful hostilities. Your entertainment broadcasts have corrupted crew, discipline, and undermined proper military hatred." Patricia looked at both alien commanders and realized they reminded her of her divorced neighbors who complained about each other constantly but somehow never managed to actually move to different neighborhoods. "Gentlemen, I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule of not fighting each other to meet with us." The comment was delivered so politely that both commanders needed several seconds to process the implied criticism. Dr. Kevin Thompson seized the moment to establish the tone for the entire conference. "Commander Keston, War Leader Morgul, I'd like to begin by asking each of you a simple question," Dr. Thompson said in the calm voice he used with couples on the verge of divorce. "What do you actually want from this conflict?" Kessethan's response was immediate and had clearly been rehearsed for thousands of years. "The Veltar demand acknowledgement of Zephyrian crimes against Crystalkind, reparations for damaged worlds, and guarantee that bioship expansion into Veltar space will cease permanently." Morgul's answer was equally automatic. "Zephyrian people require recognition of Veltar aggression, compensation for destroyed biostations, and assurance that crystal ships will not claim neutral systems as their exclusive territory." Dr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And what has 3,000 years of warfare accomplished toward achieving these goals?" The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Both commanders had been prepared to recite historical grievances and justify military action, but no one had ever asked them whether their approach was actually working. Patricia took advantage of their confusion to present her own analysis. "From what I understand, your conflict has cost both species tremendous resources, prevented expansion into potentially valuable systems, and created a situation where neither side can achieve their stated objectives because you're too busy fighting to negotiate." Sarah Mitchell, who had been broadcasting comedy shows for weeks, chose this moment to make her most serious presentation. "Commanders, I've been studying your conflict for our entertainment programs, and I noticed something interesting. You both spend more time complaining about each other than actually fighting, which suggests you might enjoy having someone to blame for your problems more than you'd enjoy solving them." The observation hit both alien leaders like a physical blow. Keston's crystal form flickered with colors that indicated shock, while Morgul's biomechanical systems produced sounds that suggested emotional distress. Naliris and Thuvan, who had been granted permission to attend as junior representatives, exchanged glances that conveyed their shared realization that the human comedian had identified something neither of their species wanted to admit. The war had become more important to their identities than peace had ever been. Dr. Thompson continued his therapeutic approach. Commander Kessethan, when was the last time your people accomplished something that wasn't related to opposing the Zephyrians? War Leader Morgul, can you describe any Zephyrian achievements from the past millennium that didn't involve your conflict with the Veltar? Both commanders struggled to answer. Their entire cultures had become defined by opposition to their ancient enemies, leaving little room for independent development or achievement. Tony Martinez, who had caused so much disruption with his comedy routines, offered a surprisingly practical suggestion. What if you two tried competing with each other instead of fighting? Humans do it all the time. Sports, business, science, art, we compete constantly. But we don't try to destroy each other over it. Neliris spoke up from her position near the back of the room, her voice carrying the harmonic patterns that indicated a formal proposal in Veltar culture. Junior Officer Neliris requests permission to present an alternative to resumed hostilities. Thuvin added his own voice, using bioharmonic frequencies that signified official Zephyrian diplomatic language. Communications Specialist Thuvin seconds the Veltar proposal and wishes to contribute to peaceful resolution. Both commanders stared at their junior officers in amazement. Neliris and Thuvin had not only communicated with enemy personnel, but had apparently coordinated their presentation in advance. We have studied human approaches to conflict resolution, Neliris continued, and we believe our species could benefit from competition rather than warfare. Humans excel through competing in science, art, exploration, and cultural achievement. Perhaps Veltar and Zephyrians could redirect our energies towards similar goals. Thuvin expanded on the proposal. Instead of fighting over territorial claims, we could compete to develop new worlds more efficiently. Rather than destroying each other's space stations, we could compete to build better ones. Human entertainment has shown us that competition can be enjoyable and productive rather than destructive. Dr. Thompson smiled at both young aliens. That's an excellent suggestion. Competition allows both sides to achieve excellence while maintaining their distinct identities and pride. Admiral Hayes presented the final element of humanity's unprecedented diplomatic solution. Earth proposes the establishment of the Galactic Cultural Exchange, with the first interspecies comedy festival, featuring Veltar and Zephyrian participants alongside human performers. Instead of settling your differences through warfare, you could try settling them through laughter. The idea was so completely alien to both species that neither commander could formulate an immediate objection. The concept of resolving conflict through humor had no precedent in either culture's military tradition. Captain Morrison, who had started the entire process with his decision to broadcast human entertainment, offered the final argument. Commanders, you've spent 3,000 years proving you can destroy each other. Why not spend some time proving you can create something together? The breakthrough came when Sarah Mitchell performed one final comedy routine, specifically for the diplomatic conference. She created a sketch featuring exaggerated versions of both commanders as contestants on a game show called Who Can Hold a Grudge the Longest? Today's grand prize winners have maintained their anger for 3,000 years without ever actually accomplishing anything productive, she announced. But wait, there's more. If they agree to try something different, they could win valuable prizes like peaceful coexistence, cultural exchange, and not having to spend all their money on weapons. Both Keston and Morgul found themselves laughing, despite their efforts to maintain proper diplomatic dignity. The human comedian had made their ancient conflict sound so ridiculous that continuing it would be more embarrassing than ending it. The formal agreement that emerged from the conference was unlike any treaty in galactic history. The Treaty of Chuckles, as it became known throughout the galaxy, established the first peace accord, ratified through laughter rather than solemn ceremony. Both species agreed to redirect their competitive energies toward cultural and scientific achievement rather than warfare. Neliris and Thuvin became the first co-hosts of Galactic Comedy Hour, an entertainment program that helped other species learn human approaches to conflict resolution. The final scene of humanity's strangest diplomatic victory took place 6 months later when Admiral Hayes attended the opening ceremony of the first interspecies cultural festival. Veltar and Zephyrian performers shared the stage with human comedians, presenting entertainment that celebrated their differences rather than using them as excuses for warfare. Commander Keston and War Leader Morgul, now bearing the ceremonial titles of Cultural Exchange Ambassadors, delivered a joint presentation about their species' transition from warfare to peaceful competition. Neither would admit they were enjoying themselves, but their participation in human-style comedy routines suggested otherwise.